So I saved a couple of things in here. Let's see, under brush, I saved a couple of brushes. They're all by name here, so skin. So there are a couple of brushes that I created without using any alphas, and those are interesting if you can do the same. I mean, the first one is the wrinkle carving, that one I was showing before. The one I showed in the first class, right? Like just creating a slightly pointy brush, so you can actually, you know, work on the wrinkles. This one uses lazy mouse, but sometimes I just like turning off lazy mouse completely, just because it gets a little bit more broken when you turn it off. So it gets a little bit more random, and then you know, it gets you a better result when you're looking for like more organic stuff than those very straight, perfect lines in there. So this is one very simple one to create. This is the first one we created before. But then there's a couple of other ones using just ZBrush without any alphas. So actually using the ZBrush default alphas. So I created this random pores big here. And the way I did it was basically a standard brush. Just like when you start, you can just pick standard. And then stroke, I got the spray, the color spray one. And then I set the flow to 0.25, the color to 0.2. But in this case, since we are not colorizing, it's just for sculpting, it really doesn't matter. But when you're sculpting, actually, when you're painting, actually matters. And the scale is 1, and the placement is at 0.5. And for the alpha, you can actually pick like any alpha you prefer. This one I picked was like brush alpha. Which one was that? I believe like any of those guys would work fine as long as you have a good, you know, a little curvature right there. I add a little bit of a point to it. So I think I started with the 39 and I carved it to have a little point. So if you use this guy, it's really good to just randomize things. So for example, I'm going to be, oh, I still have a mask in there, sorry. I think that's the reason I was having trouble carving it before as well. Still have a mask that was hidden. So this one is just to add some kind of like a, you know, randomization. Again, if you're going for the skin that's completely real, then it's interesting if you observe and you capture things from the pictures, because you get that pillowy kind of surface. But then if you're looking for something else, you know, it's like something that you really don't need all the little fine detail, and you just want to get the impression of the form. So you can use this one. So this one randomizes. This one I call randomizer, the bigger one. And then I have this small one that's basically the same structure. Just using a modification of the alpha, so I think I inverted it. I'm using some radial fade and actually using the mid value at 50. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I inverted the alpha. Yeah, I inverted it. So in this case here, I'm using the stroke, the spray. It doesn't matter, it can be color spray or spray. I think this one is spray, flow at 0.25, color doesn't matter again because we're sculpting. Scale at 1, placement 0.5, so very straightforward. But this one has a little bit of more of a point right there. So I can just like, you can start randomizing like that. So this adds some kind of like a interesting structure, like to give an impression of the skin. So just a smaller one. And of course, it's all based on the speed you're sculpting. If you do something really fast like this, you're going to get like much more spread out detail, right? And of course, you can control that as well, or the placement here. You can make like much, you know, spaced out between them. But it's interesting to observe, because sometimes if you use like a very, very small placement right here, And then you can do stuff like based on the speed you're painting. If you do like super fast, you're going to see like very spread out stuff. If you do a little bit, slower, then you're going to start seeing things like combining like that. So this is another example of stuff done with just ZBrush. And then there is one here that's very useful, and this is one I use for creatures a lot. It's the, let's see, arms. Where is it? Where's the visual detail randomizer? Okay, so this one here, it's this. Again, you start with the standard brush, and then under stroke, same thing. Flow 0.25, color 0.5, scale 1, and placement 0.5. And then I'm using this alpha here that comes with ZBrush, which is great for wrinkles. You'd never imagine it because it's just like this straight line, but I mean, if I get like a place like this, I can do like a very organized, for example, like this, go in a single direction. Let me try to do a little bit bigger here so you can see. I know you kind of lose resolution a little bit when because of the streaming. So it goes directional like that, and then you can change the direction to complete it like that. So you have this very organic kind of feel to it, and I use for like kind of like elephant skin texture all the time, this kind of stuff. Or you can just like, instead of like doing with all this control and going like side to side and up and down, you can just like do very randomly in circular movements. So using the same brush, you do this just in circles like that, and then you get like a very organic kind of cracked surface, right? One thing I use a lot for, when I'm sculpting, it's a little bit of inflate for everything to add the extra realism to the texture. So I'm going to crank this one a little bit higher. The original one I made 12 for intensity. I'm going to put it 20, 19 or something. I'm going to crank it a little bit more here. I'm going to do the same thing. Oops, too big. Same thing here. But then, similar to what I did before, but the difference here is I'm going to be adding some inflate. So I'm going to switch to inflate brush right here. And then for intensity, I'm going to reduce all the way from 10 to 2. And I'm going to start inflating things because the reason I put back to 2 is because by the original one here, the intensity at 10, that's the original setting, it gets like really, really, sorry, destroys your detail because it starts like over-inflating things. So what I'm going to try to do is actually just add a little bit of inflate to it, just to get some more organic feel, but without a lot of intersection of the form. So I'm going to go like really slow. I'm going to move from here. Going to go like, can use 2 or even 1 sometimes. Just like inflating like that. So this, for example, if you're sculpting a creature, or it's like any detail you want to add like to make it look organic. So just inflating. So the reason I do this is just like to get this. You look from from close up right now. You start seeing that the detail gets a little bit more organic because it looks like they're actually colliding with each other. That's basically what happens in the skin anyway, right? So you get this much more natural feel to it. And you see this is like very, very simple kind of technique, but it really adds a lot. The reason why I say use 2 as intensity instead of like using something higher is this. I'm going to just hide half of it here, just a piece, so you can actually see in there. So let me hide this one too. So you can see the back right there, right? So that's what's starting to happen. If it's overinflated, you start seeing this. The back of the surface here, you can see that everything starts intersecting, and then this becomes a mess. one thing that's going to happen is that the displacement in first place is going to be a little bit messy in certain areas if it's too overinflated. And the other thing that's going to happen is that if you're exporting like a fairly high-res mesh or a decimated version of it to your render of preference, all those intersections in here, depending on the render engine you're using, the subsurface can get a little bit messy, can get some weird results because it's not a clean surface. So of course, if I go there and then I start like, cleaning up with a little smooth, I can get rid of those things. But then try to imagine doing this, it's like after you did all the detail for, the whole body. So that's why it's important to go with like 2 or even 1. And I was somehow careful in there. It's still I got like some intersections going on. So it's really a matter of, you see it's a little bit overinflated in there. I think it got more successful where it didn't have a lot of detail, like right here, gets very subtle. So yeah, just something to keep in mind that, it can cause a lot of, headache. And then we're going to get to the, let's see if I have any more like made here in ZBrush. Oh yeah, I got some more here. So for the nose pores, for example, I was using the random small one I just showed you. That was like this, right? So if I texturing the nose with this, it's a little bit too much already. So maybe I can just reduce the intensity just to get some irregular surface in there, but somehow subtle, right? And then play with intensity again, put a little bit smaller and a little bit more intense, and then do another pass just to get some more random surface like this. But really close so you can see it. And then with this brush I created here, that's called Porous Nose Individual, I'm using the 39 again, brush 39, alpha 39, cranking it to get the point in there. But then using it in combination with, instead of like dots or freehand, I'm using with the drag rectangle. And then this way you can really accentuate, because the nose is very, you saw like it's like the pores are very specific and kind of individual. So you can just go, so I can add like little hints like that. Go ahead and then you get like some, from distance, it gets very natural when you look from distance. You can always go back and kind of like smooth it out a little bit to get, a little bit more natural result. But I mean, that's another way to do it. Just like have some individual ones that you can actually go and just, accentuate stuff. Then we can go back here, and there is a couple of ones I created from pictures. So this one, for example, for the arms. So this was an alpha. That's basically a picture you can see in there that was turned black and white in Photoshop and then cropped. This one is only 519 pixels square. And then one thing that I normally do when I create my alphas, and that's what I expect you guys to do. When you go to Photoshop and you pick like some picture on the internet or from your own skin, and then you're going to turn it black and white, making sure that it's almost like a 50% gray. There's a couple of ways you can do that in Photoshop. You can create an additional layer and then colorize that layer to become 50% gray, and then you can use it as a reference to to measure the levels of your alpha. And then another thing I do here, when I create the alpha and I bring to ZBrush, I just use some tweaks here. So under modify, I use a little bit of a radial fade, right? So it adds like this kind of like fades to nothing. So it starts with the texture in the middle and fades to nothing. This is the amount of pixels. And then there's the mid value. That's by default is 0. So when you see it at 0, you see that I have that circle in there. And so if I try to sculpt something like this, it creates this almost like this bulge around it, right? Because I have that circle. So it creates this bulge effect. But then if I tweak the alpha to have the bead value at 50%, Let me just type it in here. Then you're actually just adding the texture itself, because ZBrush is compensating, the radial fade around it. Instead of like going all the way to black, it's going to 50%. So you basically don't get the bulge anymore. You get just the detail the way you would want. So this one was a picture of the, I think was the arm. I don't remember if it was arm or the back. But that's like, the pores are pre-open. I think this one is for the back, actually. So one trick here that's interesting to notice is that, okay, I have this one, and I can add all this texture. I normally use just a drag rectangle to do that. So I can place and I can rotate. So you can just click and rotate like that. So you can add some kind of like a little bit more, make it a little bit more random, right? And then get all those guys in there. But then, of course, if you don't wanna, if you wanna do something more interesting, like for those chicken skin or goosebumps in the neck, you can just like press Alt and invert this thing, and then all of a sudden you have like an instant, chicken skin right there. So you have like all the. So this one is great for neck, for example. So if I use this one, I can always combine them, right? I can combine with the randomizer here. Just add a little bit more random stuff. And then I can just go and get like the individual ones. Where is the one individual? And then since this one was for creating like pores for the nose, right? I can just do the same thing. Press Alt to invert it, and then I can create those pimples. You can start like with small ones, all kinds of sizes, and then bigger ones. And then you can turn off Alt, and then you can create like little pores again going down. So this way you can add like more random things like bumps and things like that. The face is never perfect. You always have like those scars and pimples and things like that. So that's another way to do it. Let me just go over here. Let's see if we have any more of those guys. I'm going to go over and just show how I did it in Photoshop, just in case. But here's the deal. Let me open Photoshop here. And I'm going to pick like.
Hey Chris, a couple questions while that's opening up.
Sure.
Do you use layers at all in ZBrush when you're doing that detailing of the wrinkles?
Yeah, I mean, like, it all depends. From my personal work, I normally do pretty straightforward. Not a lot of layers involved. But at work, I do use layers a lot, and for the Hulk work was all like with layers. So yeah, it's a lot of planning, right? Like, so if you have like a veins, and then we have veins, and you have to combine with the pores, and then there are wrinkles. It's good if you can just like separate everything in layers, and this way you can just like control each one. And it's like, okay, the veins are bulging too much, like just reduce a little bit, and okay, the pores in relation to the wrinkles are a little bit too high, so you can bring it back. But one thing I noticed is that once everything is done and you really want to export all those passes, the ones you want to combine, sometimes even if you keep them on in the layers on in ZBrush and try to export like 3 different layers as a displacement map, ZBrush gets a little bit confused. So what I do, I normally save that file, so I have it saved, and then I basically bake all the layers that I want, like ZBrush to produce the displacement, and then I bake it, because it never works very well the other way, at least for me.
Cool. And one last question.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's important if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
When you were talking about the inside of the skin, when you were doing the inflate, why and when and why would we have to worry about the inside of the geometry? I missed that part.
Oh, the thing is, like, it all depends of what's your intention. If you're gonna, export like a fairly high res mesh, and you have, instead of like using displacement maps, some people like me, I like exporting a fairly high-res mesh and then rendering directly in V-Ray sometimes. Even if it's Dynameshed, you know, it's like you're still gonna get this stuff like kind of like, you know, interpenetrating in there. And although V-Ray doesn't give me a lot of trouble, I observed that certain other render engines give you some kind of like dark spots and things when you have intersection between geometry. And then that's the main concern. It all depends on what's the render you're using. But basically, that's the only concern. I mean, in theory, nothing that you're seeing in there should affect it, and it's not going to affect if you're using like a solid shader. But if you're using subsurface, that's something that's going to calculate based on the surface itself in order to produce the scatter. Then you might run into trouble. So I'm going to get, let's see, which one would be a good one here. Let's see from Martin's hand, this guy here. So to produce your alphas, I expect you guys to do something similar to this. I'm going to just zoom in here and find like a spot that doesn't have a lot of highlights. Actually, if it has highlights, it's kind of fine. This one is kind of like a flat light. It's a very diffuse light. That's the main thing. But try not to get like a spot where you have a lot of dark areas like this in the middle right here, in contrast to some areas with no dark at all. Because yeah, ZBrush is gonna kind of create a depression in there in that dark area. So in this case here, the most important area going to be always the middle circle one, because you're going to be using radial fade. So in this case, I'm going to just select probably this area here should be fine. I'm going to crop it, and then under image size, I can just define, just to make the very anal, we're going to put like a 1K 1024. All right. So that's basically what we got. And then in Maya, you have this adjustment. In Photoshop, you have adjustment, and then you have black and white. And by default, that's basically what Photoshop does. But you have those presets here, and you can get like something more like on the green side or the blue side, or more contrasty. So maximum black right here, get more contrast. So in this case here, I'm going to just use default for now. And then, so it's basically like an RGB 8 bits, and I'm going to save it. Instead of exporting, I'm going to save it, and I'm going to save as Photoshop file. And go to class 3 skin test. And I'm saving it as PSD because I don't know if this version of ZBrush has fixed it. But I had problems exporting stuff in TIFF in the past and then trying to re-import in ZBrush, and ZBrush would not re-import it, or even the JPEG and things like that. But Photoshop is the one that normally gives me no trouble. So I'm going to just export as Photoshop. And then here, the way I'm going to create the alpha, I'm going to just switch back to standard brush. And under alpha here, I'm going to create click import. Lesson 3 skin, and then class 3 skin test. That's it. So that's the skin right there, the alpha we just created. And then again, I'm going to go to radial fade. I'm going to add 10 in here. And then the mid value actually depends, because it all depends of, you know, since I didn't pay too much attention about the gray levels in Photoshop, I can just guess here. But it seems like looking at the top, if you look at this guy here, you can see that at 50 is fairly okay actually. So at 50 should be okay. I'm going to keep it 50. And then I'm going to switch to drag rectangle. See, it's a little bit faint right there. So I can crank the intensity. By default, it's 15 for me. I'm going to crank, let's see, 31. Now it's really strong right there. So he actually is not too strong. If I can keep it 31, but then in alpha I can just add a little bit of a blur to it. So probably 3 for blur. Can try to maximize it in here, but let's see, maximize, just make sure I kind of matching the alpha intensity with the new value I got because I turned on max. So I'm gonna just get something around here, and then I get a much better result. So a little bit of blur normally helps. So in that case there, if it's a little bit too strong, I can just put like 25 maybe. Yeah, that's better. So I got this brush here now that I can use for my stuff. And then another thing you can do if you're not completely happy, because those brushes from pictures, unlike brushes you extract from scans, they're basically based on the on the lighting that you're getting in the picture. So sometimes you don't get the real form in there. So one thing you can do, you can actually tweak those things to make it more realistic and the way you want them to look like. So I'm going to just go to Tool. I'm going to create a plane in here, convert it to a Polymesh 3D, and I'm going to press Control D to subdivide. So I'm going to subdivide a couple of times to get more detail. So 4 million polygons should be okay. And then with this plane here now, I can just draw that brush I just did like that. Let's get the fade around there. So yeah, let's say I'm happy with this one. So you see, some of those areas they don't have like the depth I wanted them to have. So what I can do, since I'm working on the plane right now, I can just go to Z-Add, right? Like I'm using the carving brush, the first one we created. And then I can just go here and really, this is really if you want to do something that it looks more realistic, right? Like if you're extracting stuff from a picture. So you can just carve those forms a little bit deeper. Get more volume to the whole thing. So I'm going to be just carving, adding some more detail here, just as an example. And then I can just use a little bit of inflate as well. I'm going to use 1 actually. Very, very subtle. So I'm going to carve it a little bit more. Add some bigger ones here probably. Oops, too much. 12. And then of course if you want to go crazy, you can just use some of the other brushes we created before and mix everything in a single one. So the random pores here, the bigger ones, just add some of them just to randomize the form a little bit more. The small ones as well. And then once you're happy with the way it looks, you can just create a brand new brush based on this one. And ZBrush gives you a couple of ways to do it. I mean, you can just capture the whole thing as an alpha here based on the image anyway. Just click alpha here and you just gain. Oh, I'm gonna mess with that one. Let me just switch to standard. So just click alpha and then grab document, right? So this one becomes an alpha in there. But then there is another one that's actually you have to transform everything in 2.5D in ZBrush. That means you have, from a 3D plane, you're going to become just like a flat plane on the background. But then, okay, so right now we have the plane. I'm going to just click here under Tool, and I'm going to click this guy called MRGBZ Grabber. So if I click this one, I get a message that says that ZBrush is in edit mode. That means it's in 3D mode. So you want to switch to the no 3D mode, and you say like, oh yeah, please, always switch and skip mode, blah blah blah. So always switch. So now this is 2.5D. So that means I cannot rotate this anymore. It's basically baked in there. But then the way this mRGBZ grabber works, you just click in the very middle right there. You have to kind of like try to gas the middle, and then you just press it, and you can press shift to create a perfect square, right? And then you release it, and then ZBrush creates for you a texture. So that means if you had any color in here, ZBrush would bake the texture and will produce a texture here for you, right? It can be useful. I'm going to turn it off for now. And then ZBrush creates a depth, which is the alpha here. So that's the new brush we got. So under alpha, I just got a radial fade in here, 10. And then for the mid value, I'm going to try to compensate to get to similar to that one. I think I might need a little bit more here for the alpha. Intensity can play too. If it's too much, you can just play with intensity as well. Oh, it's so hard to deal with those sliders sometimes. Okay, so in this case here, I'm going to go back to the eye I had. Oops, what am I getting here? I'm not getting, oh, no radial fade. It's bizarre. I thought I had it. Oh, I think I dragged it again, huh? I think I did twice. Okay, so that's the one I need. Yeah, so now I have the alpha the way I want it. If it's too strong, again, I can just tweak it in there, intensity, and then you can play with it. So that's just another way, you know, it's like to use the picture and then enhance it in ZBrush, add more detail to it, and then save as a different alpha. So once you have your alphas created simply in a similar way like I did here, or and then we can just go to a brush. You can click on brush, and you can just say save as. And then we're going to save, it's always under ZBrush install folder. That's the way the ZBrush is going to find stuff. So normally the place I save, if I go to program files, and then Pixel Logic, and then ZBrush R4, and then there's this Z startup. You can save it in there, or you can just say, okay, save under Z brushes. And then you can create that folder in here under Z brushes. I created one that's called Skin, and I already saved a bunch of them in there. So if I just name something here, so module 3, oh, I have it, skin. Skin sample. Okay, module 3 skin sample. So I saved that one. So that means that you know, a lot of people like to save the alphas only, but then if you save the alpha, that means that every time you're going to have to load the alpha in here, and then you're going to have to set to drag rectangle, and then you're going to have to set the settings and everything. But if you save the brush itself like I just did, once you load this brush, everything going to be set for you. So since I saved in that folder in there I just showed you, if you now go to Lightbox, it should be here. See, like module 3 skin. So that's the one I need. So if you double click, you're going to go straight to the settings that are already working for you. So yeah, that's basically it for the skin. Now I'm going to be opening a model, like the model I continued from the past week. So maybe just like a preference here and init ZBrush, just to get rid of this whole thing. Any questions so far? It's going.
There's a few questions about your work on the Hulk.
Okay. If it's very specific, I cannot talk about it because of NDA stuff. But
yeah. One, is there any? Are there any images that you're allowed to share or to show us other than what we've kind of seen
Not
already?
at all. I mean, like the images allowed are the ones you can find on the internet. You know, like there's plenty of interviews out there. You know, the ones we show at the Pixologic presentation are basically like I show a lot of very detailed stuff at the. If any of you guys were at the Pixologic booth for ILM's presentation, that's basically like the luckiest we can get because it's so hard to get stuff out there, man. For good reasons. I mean, like they have to protect the studios, and you know, so.
Yeah, I think someone was asking earlier. Were you ever allowed to take the Hulk home and work on him at home?
No, not at all. Not at all. That's out of question.
Yeah. Okay. Also, regarding the Hulk again, did you have to make different models with different skin resolutions based off of close-ups, or was it basically all one big crazy model that was used for all purposes?
I mean, like again, I cannot talk about specifics. So other than you know stuff that was mentioned on the websites and things, but I mean, I didn't model the Hulk, right? Like it was Geo. Geo was the modeler. I just add the fine detail and skin detail and pores and things like that. So I don't know. I don't know what I can say about it. I would prefer not to talk too much about it, but really encourage you guys to go and look for interviews and things like that. I'm sorry about that. It's just like it's completely unrelated to. I mean, I mentioned it, of course, but it's kind of like you have to have an authorization to talk about anything, basically. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of proprietary software and techniques that they're using in-house as well. So.
But I mean, like those techniques I used are basically not very different from what I'm showing here, other than scans involved and things like that. But other than that, it's all basically like pretty straightforward. Creating alphas, I created a library of like a bunch of alphas, and I was able to detail using those. So.